Hello. So we are going to focus right now on how we set a busk into our corset front. So a couple of things I want to point out is that there is a right and a wrong side to a busk. If we look closer, we have the knobs, the attachment where it is riveted into the steel bone. That is the top of the busk. And so we need to make sure that that is facing to the exterior of the corset when we put that in. The same thing is true on the knob side of the busk. If you notice, and this one's particularly pronounced, not all of them are quite so obvious, but the knobs are set closer to one edge of the corset, of the busk, than the other side of the steel bone. And you want to make sure that that side is the side that is closest to your center front. If you put it the other way, then when you go to close it, you'll see that then actually your bones end up overlapping, which is creating more bulk and also making your corset smaller than it should be. To make your corset lay nicely, you do need to make sure that your busk is going to be sitting, and it usually has just a small gap in between it. So those are the sort of main things we need to know about our busk itself. When we are setting our busk into the actual corset, this is just a sample piece I've made, and I've bound the top and the bottom. I have a right side and a wrong side, and so this is the wrong side of the side that I'm going to be putting the knob, not the knob portion, but the latch portion of the busk into. The other piece will be where I end up putting the knobs into. So let's focus on this first. It's the easiest to do. So let's do that. So the first thing I want to recommend is that you can see my stitch line is there. It's marked in light pencil. And if you can see, there's just a light layer of armor weft interfacing on the centered over that line. The way we're going to work this is we're going to be stitching buttonholes into this seam right on that edge so that we can slide these through the buttonholes and fold it backwards. And then we will secure it. So with my busk, I want to first make sure I'm centering my busk on my piece. Now, your busk should not go all the way from edge to edge. It should actually be set in a little bit. And since most busks are sold only in whole sizes, there is a good chance that it might be an inch or maybe slightly more that you have on the top and the bottom combined. So you can see here, this was cut to 10 inches. My busk is actually measuring 9 inches, and so I have centered this in between. I've marked ½ inch on the top and the bottom, and so I have just given myself a small mark right here to do that. Then what I'm going to do is, leaving this centered right on there, I am going to mark, and notice that my busk is actually facing downwards into the fabric because this is the wrong side of the fabric, and this is the way that it will slide into the openings once we make them. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, using a sharp pencil, I am now going to mark the tops and the bottoms of every one of these latches. So when I pull that away, you can see that we have the marks of where we are going to sew our buttonholes. So that is my next step, is to go ahead and stitch in my buttonholes. I will be back soon. Alright, so we are back. I have now put in the buttonholes, and so as you can see, and I've also cut them open. I made them in a contrasting color just so that you can visually see them. Normally I would make it white or the color of the corset if this had a fashion fabric on it. I feel like I also neglected to mention earlier the reasoning for the interfacing here is because I always feel strongly that you should have at least 2 layers of fabric that you're stitching a buttonhole through, just to give it a little bit more stability. So now that we have the buttonholes open and cut, I also want to point out at this point that notice that I went to the outer edges of my buttonhole. That way I'm not accidentally making the buttonhole too small. It's always better to err on a slightly larger buttonhole because it will actually keep it in place better. So when I go to insert this, you'll see that I am going to take the side that is the right side of it, and I'm going to put it face down on the wrong side of my fabric. And now that I've cut these all open, you can see it just slides right in, and then we can pull this back, and now I've got my knobs sticking out the front of the corset. So once that's in there tightly, you can now finish this off in one of two ways. The couple of ways that I would do this is either you can come in here and stitch this close to the busk, and then if you did that, you could fold this back and then cross stitch that down to hold it in place. That way you have a little bit more room to work. Or oftentimes what I might do is make this seam allowance much smaller, so it's just coming past there and enough to fold under, so that then, let's see if I can do this without cutting all this off. Then when I have this in here, I could come in here and with my zipper foot stitch right close to where the edge of that bone case, the bone is for the front of that particular side of the busk. And then I could top stitch that down. So you can see that is the two methods I did on these corsets that I previously made. So this corset, you can see that it has just been hand stitched down and holding back. Now part of the reason why this one had to be hand stitched is, as you can see, there's actually a bone right in that exact spot where the busk is going. So we couldn't stitch through the bone. The other style, which is the more preferred method because it holds better, is you can see here that it's hard to see because it's white, but the stitching line is right there, and I just stitched right next close to the bone. On the other side you can see where it's been folded under and stitched down. And if you have a lot, this particular one, you can see it has extra at the bottom because this is a teens corset, and so you could stitch at the bottom to hold that in place, or you could even add some pretty flossing to hold the bone. So that is the two different ways that you could secure that side of the busk into place. So next we will move on to securing and attaching the knob portion of the busk into the corset.